Hello and welcome to the Sonic Cinema podcast. My name is Brian Scuttle. Thank you for joining me at www.sonic-cinema.com, as well as the Sonic Cinema podcast YouTube channel. We continue on with the class of 1999 with one of my favorite comedies from that year. It's a movie I go back to often. It's one of my favorite movies about making movies, and it's written by Steve Martin and directed by Frank Oz. It is Bowfinger, and joining me to discuss it is a filmmaker who's been on here quite a bit, and I'm looking forward to having this discussion with him. Please welcome back to the show, Chris Esper. Thank you very much for joining me.
Brian, thank you for having me on again.
um, what? When did you first watch Bowfinger?
I first watched Bowfinger. I want to say my late teens, early 20s. When I was in college, and I had been, uh, for some reason, looking back at some of the work of Frank Oz, of whom I've always been a fan,
Mm-hmm.
and I had not seen Bowfinger out of all his other films, so I went ahead, watched it, and I was just kind of like binging on some of his movies that I have not seen at that time, and so I watched it, and like you, it became an instant favorite for me. It was just fantastic all across the board.
Mm-hmm. And I'm glad it sort of came to. I'm glad to hear that you kind of got into watch Bowfinger because of Frank Oz, because of the fact that Frank Oz is a filmmaker that I think a lot of people just they don't really think of him so much with regards to his filmmaking as much
Right.
as his puppeteering. And I mean,
Sure.
certainly between Yoda and between the Muppets and all that, is a legend.
Sure. Yeah.
But at the same time, if you look at films like Little Shop of Horrors, you look at Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, Bowfinger, Death at a Funeral, which I
Yes.
adore, is one of my
Oh,
favorite
me too.
films of his. He's just such an in and out, which has a marvelous
Yes.
turn by Kevin Kline.
Yep.
He's just got this. He's got this natural comedic ability that is just always so wonderful to get into, and it's perfect for the screenplay that Steve Martin writes here.
Yeah. Yeah. And going back to that as well, I think many also forget what a brilliant writer Steve Martin is.
Yeah.
Between Three Amigos, which I had no idea he had written until recently. I didn't think he even touched that script, but yeah, he had written that. Of course, Roxanne, which is a masterpiece on its own. In its own right, and of course the jerk, so
Mm-hmm.
so you combine that with his writing ability, you combine that with Frank Oz's genius for comedy. That's a winning formula right there. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and this is a movie that I think in the hands of another filmmaker could have been very cynical about low budget
Yes.
filmmaking in Hollywood. And this takes on the same affectionate tone that Ed Wood did.
Yes, I'm glad you said that. Absolutely. Because that's what I kept thinking when I was rewatching it yesterday was what was how much in the spirit of Ed Wood that this picture was, and also, in the same spirit as, like, let's say, American Movie, which had come out the same year, I believe, as Bowfinger,
Mm-hmm.
and a couple other movies that celebrated the dream of Hollywood, the dream of filmmaking, and the little guy getting together, all the misfits creating trying to get this crazy dream of making a movie to come
Yeah.
to life.
No, and I mean, we could talk about a little bit of the story here because of the fact that I mean, Bobby Bowfinger, the Steve Martin character, is very much in the Ed Wood vein as far as
Yes,
his romantic feelings about making movies and his
right,
desire to make movies.
without a
But
doubt.
he's not afraid to cut corners, and in a way he's kind of a con man. But you
Yes,
also see why he's doing the con. You understand sort of like he's basically he's basically a filmmaker who his whole purpose is he wants to get the film made by hook or by crook. and
Yes.
that's basically the idea. So I mean, I say con man, but I don't want it doesn't mean that Bobby Bowfinger's a bad guy.
No. No. And as a matter of fact, in a lot of the instances where he is being quote a con man, you're actually rooting for him and you're laughing because
Yeah,
like when he's telling the actors, oh, it's $25 to audition, and that's such a ridiculous concept, and it's horrible, but you laugh because you go with this guy's plight to make this film happen,
right.
to make the crazy dream a reality.
Well, and the whole point of him saying, "Oh, it's $25 to audition." It's basically another. He's just trying to get more money
He's trying
so
to get
that
yep, he's trying to get the budget.
he can
Yep,
get this made. I mean, that's the
yep,
whole reason for it.
that's right.
And that's and but yeah, and so when Daisy comes in, it's like, oh, I'm sorry, we can only take cash checks. We can't
Right,
really
right.
take a check. It's like you understand what's going on. It's not because of the
Sure,
fact that
yeah,
he wants to take he wants he doesn't want to take her money. It's because of the fact that he's trying to do this as much on the down low as possible.
sure, yeah.
So, and yeah, I mean, this cast is amazing. Like
Oh
I'm
my,
always
yes,
blown away by how massive this cast is. I mean,
it really is.
I mean, you've got Steve Martin and A. Murphy who are
Sure.
in their first film together.
Mm-hmm.
You have Christine Baranski, who's just
Yes,
a delight in her
yes.
role. You've got Jamie Kennedy, who is
Mm-hmm.
still relatively hot at the time. You have Heather Graham, who's continued to work. And I mean, this was her coming off of Boogie Nights, and she had
Right.
just done Austin Powers 2 this summer.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then there are times where you completely forget until he shows up that Robert Downey Jr. is in
That's
here,
right. That's right.
and as Jerry Renfro, and just
Yep. Yep.
the two scenes that he has in the movie, he just kills it.
Yeah, and same with also Terrence Stepp as the new age guru sort of guy.
Well, let's be honest. I mean, Mindhead is essentially Scientology.
Oh, without a doubt.
That's
Yeah.
Steve Martin's dig at Scientology is and
Yeah.
yeah, and even but the funny thing for me about that is even if you don't necessarily get even if you've never necessarily heard of like everything that supposedly goes on in Scientology, you basically know that that's Scientology that he's
Absolutely.
riffing on,
Yep.
and
Yep.
yeah, it's just so fantastic. And I mean this cast is so good,
It
and
really is. Yep.
like there's not weak link in it. It's
Nope.
just so much fun, and like I love that Jerry Renfro basically goes with Bowfinger in the scene in the restaurant,
Yeah. Yep.
and it's like, oh, can I talk to him? And
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like he knows what's going on,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
he also just kind of can't believe what's going on either, and that's one of the things I
Right.
really
Right.
love
Right.
about it.
Right.
And
Yep.
I mean, Downey just sells it just masterfully.
Yep. Yep. And he never once lets on. He knows what's going on. That's what makes it so
Hmm.
funny. He just plays it straight, and he just goes with it. And he's yeah. Even in those two scenes, he steals it in every scene.
Yeah. Now, as a filmmaker, just as a filmmaker, how and somebody who works with low budgets a lot, how inspiring is this movie to you?
uh, it actually is very inspiring, actually, and it reminds me very much of when I first started, and I was like doing a lot of this stuff on my own before I had any kind of crew to speak of
Yeah.
on any of my things, and even today, I once in a while I still find myself in a one man band situation, or I find myself in a situation shooting for a director whose budget is so low and he's just screaming by the barrel to make this crazy thing happen. I'm standing there just like kind of like I don't know what I'm doing right now, but man, this is but this is what it's all about. It's that passion, that drive,
Mm-hmm.
that will to make it happen under any circumstances, and also as someone who lived in California for a short period for an internship, it's reminiscent for me. It's nostalgic for me in that way as well. When I watch this movie now,
Yeah. And I yeah, I mean, I know when I've tried my hand at filmmaking, I mean, this is definitely a movie that comes up. I mean, it's for me, like I'm more in, I'm definitely more in Bowfingers camp where it's like I just really had no money whatsoever when I
sure,
was trying to make movies. So it's like, it was basically trying to, I mean, if you're a member of my Patreon, you'll know that earlier this summer I posted a commentary for what I completed of my first short film,
saw that. Yes,
and and I and one of the things that I point out, if you will, if you'll recall, the quote unquote production company that I came up with for mine was Cinema Nouveau, which is inspired by
that's
this
right.
movie. And it's like this line that Bowfinger gives Christine Baranski's character when he's telling her about this, trying to justify this crazy idea of that they're trying to basically film Kit Ramsey without him
Without
knowing.
him knowing,
It's
yeah.
like, oh, we're working in a new style. We're working in something new, and it's called Cinema Nouveau. And it's
The
like
Nouveau, yes.
it I mean, it was also probably just a, just sort of a riff off of like the French New Wave, make it French because of the fact that the French New Wave and stuff like that. But at the
Yeah,
same time, it's like it just means new cinema. That's all you're saying.
yeah,
And
pretty much.
but
Yeah,
so
yeah.
yeah, when I like that was an idea I had. It's like, oh yeah, my production company will be Cinema Nouveau, and it's like, yeah. So that's where that came from.
That's awesome.
But yeah, this movie, we haven't really talked about A. Murphy yet, and A. Murphy is just phenomenal in this
Oh my
movie.
god.
I mean,
Yeah.
this might be probably my favorite performance of his.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. He's done a lot of great films. Like I love Coming to America. I love, of course, Beverly Hills Cop is great. All that. At
Mm-hmm.
Night Professor. This movie though, it's interesting with him because he plays two roles, of course, and
Yeah.
in both roles couldn't be more different from each other. You have one that's to the extreme where he's this guy, this famous actor, possibly with schizophrenia. We don't know. They don't let
Yeah.
on to it. And then you have this very introverted, shy guy that, without giving too much away, is his brother.
Yeah.
And it's brilliant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the fact that, I mean, you mentioned schizophrenia. It's like that could very well, but he could also be very paranoid too.
Or
And
just very paranoid. Yeah.
he's also art because he belongs to Mindhead, this
Yep.
Scientology um stand-in that Terrence Stamp is in charge of. And I mean, that's the thing. I mean, especially if you've seen Going Clear, the HBO documentary, it's like
Yeah.
you really, it's much easier to connect the dots between Mindhead and Scientology. It's like, oh yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
knew
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
before. Oh wow,
Yep.
this
Yep.
is
Yep.
closer than we think.
Yep. Yep.
But
Yep.
no, I mean, the introduction scene with Kit Ramsey is just perfect, where it's like, and he completely sets the tone for that performance because he's talking to his agent about getting um about the types of roles he's getting, and basically
Right.
like those are all the scenes with his agents, like,
Right. Right. Right.
complaining about the types of roles and complaining about the types of movies that he's getting. And
Right.
you really see this paranoia come through because of the fact that it's like, oh hey, I put this script in the computer and all the K's are divisible
Yeah.
by 3, so it's like KKK shows up I don't know how many
Right.
times.
Right. Right.
And it's like, that's such an insane idea, but it's like,
Yeah.
yeah. And then the later scene where it's like, oh, get me a slave player, give me a slave character, like what
To
was it,
play. Yeah.
Richard Slave or something like that,
Yes. Yes.
and it's like that'll get the Oscar. It's like, yeah, but
Yeah.
it's the thing that I love about this material is that it sounds very exaggerated and very comedically exaggerated, but
Sure.
it's also sadly accurate to Hollywood at the time, and even to a certain extent Hollywood now. Not as,
Yeah.
I mean, Hollywood's starting to come around a little bit as far as like, black actors and the types of roles that they get. But at the
Sure.
same time, it's like at the time the the idea of making these points was there as well, and just the way that Bobby Bowfinger's like, oh wait, yeah, well, so we're going to do this, but he can't know that he can't see the camera,
Yeah.
like it's only one take with Kit, and I mean the the most the best scene that involves is of course the parking lot scene
Oh yes.
where it's
Yes.
like and the way that cuts together and the way he develops that sequence and the way just the way that Frank Oz shoots that scene is just absolutely perfect because of the fact that you hear the high heels going and you're not quite sure, but you don't see Christine Baranski's character. And then you see that it's Steve Martin's dog
Yeah.
wearing them, and it's like, oh, he's trained them, and it's playing off the earlier jokes about him getting his dog to come to him,
Yep.
and it's just so hilarious and so perfect the way that scene is, and just it's such a great. It's just it's easy to this is a movie that's like as goofy as it is. It's like it is inspiring because of the fact that it's like, oh, that's a way of approaching a
Yeah.
scene
Yeah.
that you
Yeah.
would never necessarily think about.
Yeah, no, exactly, and I love Christine Baranski's reaction later when they're watching the footage and they're watching it play back, and she goes, "Oh, you can really see the fear on his face."
Yeah, it was so real, and it's like you
Yeah,
could really see the fear in his eyes. It's like, yeah,
right, right, right. Well, and it's funny too because in doing some reading on this film, I had what I discovered. You probably know this as well. Is that this was apparently inspired by a real incident that happened to Mary Pickford when she was in Russia and she was being filmed without her knowledge, and these Russian filmmakers released this film that she had no idea she was even in because they just filmed her doing things on her vacation. They cut it together and they released it.
hmm
This is like in the 20s.
yeah, yeah. Oh, that's right. I did remember reading that. Yeah. Um, Yeah, and I mean, it's hard. I mean, obviously, with copyright being the way it is now, and privacy, and I don't know. Yeah, you can really get away with it right
No,
now. There's no
no,
way
I
you
don't
could
think
do this.
so. No.
But which is what makes this just such a bit of lunacy. But it's lunacy in just such a wonderful way, and
Yes.
it's because you like all of the characters. It's because
Yeah.
of even though it's easy to see the con that Bobby Bowfinger is putting on, we still like him because of Steve Martin is just naturally likable, but
Yep.
also because of the fact that the character has these big dreams of making Hollywood films, and
Yep.
just and that's a very that's a very recognizable dream, and it's like it's something that he just understands so beautifully, and it's like it's the same way with the rest of the actors, with
Mhm.
the rest of his cast, with Jamie Kennedy, with Slater, the actor, Slater, the
Yep.
leading man, with Christine Baranski's character, who
Yep.
I think has one of the best lines in the entire movie at the end after they've been made out,
Yep.
and she, and being everybody's justly upset with Bobby because of the fact that he's lied to everybody, and
Yep.
she says, I think it was a beautiful lie,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
she's still holding on to this romantic idea
She's
because of
so,
the fact that
yeah.
she was working. It's like she was just grateful to be working.
Yep, yep. And then Steve Martin comes out. And he's like, well, could have worked, which was a great outlet.
Yeah,
So it's great.
and then we have to talk about the fact that it's like there's so many like just crazy little comments and commentaries and stuff like that could be made because of the fact that like the way Bobby Bowfinger and what was what was what's Jamin Kennedy's character's name?
Oh,
Wait a minute, let me see if I can find it. Dave.
right,
Dave
Dave.
is his
Yes.
name. The way they find their crew,
Yeah.
by going to
Yeah.
the border
Yeah.
and like
Yeah.
rounding up some illegal immigrants, and
Yeah.
but the great way is the fact that they get completely into it, and like
Yeah.
at one point during filmmaking, like they're one of them is reading Cashier de Cinema, I believe,
Oh, yes. Yep.
when they're when they have to during one of the scenes, and it's so hilarious to see, and they're talking about movies and stuff like that, and then by the end when they've like filmed this other footage of just Kit walking around and stuff like that eventually gets them what they need in order to finish the movie. Like they're talking about the different camera lens and you know, camera sets
Yeah.
and stuff like that they use. It's
Yep.
like, oh, thank you. And it's like, wow, you turned over. It's like you guys basically know what's going on now. So
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yep. And yeah, like I love when they talk about like Citizen Kane and all that. Like
yeah.
that was great.
um, and we haven't talked about Heather Graham, and this is probably like I really like Heather Graham in this movie.
Yeah.
She's just really wonderful. I mean, she's supposedly her character is supposedly inspired by Anne Hesh because of
Yeah.
the
I
fact
heard
that
about
it's
that.
like
Yep.
it's just because nobody had really heard of Anne Hesh, and then all of a sudden it's like she's one of the more famous people in the world, mainly because of her relationship
Ellen
with
DeGeneres.
Ellen
Yeah.
DeGeneres, and and then of course the character is also a typical cliche of actors who just got off the bus from the Midwest and is trying to
Yeah.
make it in acting, and they end up sort of sleeping their way to the top.
Exactly.
But
Yep.
the thing about it is, it's like you understand her motivation. She's kind of like Bowfinger in the same way, but
Right.
you don't really look at them in you don't really look at them in a way that you don't look poorly on them because of the fact that it's like they're they're people ultimately trying to do
Trying to do the same thing.
similar
Yep.
things, and they're
Mm-hmm.
basically like when she's told, oh hey, because Kit doesn't know he's in the movie, it's like, I'm working. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, of course later she's upset because of the fact that she ended up she ended up showing her breasts on in one scene with Jiff, which
Yep.
God, that's Eddie Murphy's reaction to Jiff in that movie.
Oh, it's
In
great.
that
Yeah.
scene is just perfect.
Oh no, it is great, and we haven't even talked about one of the funniest scenes with Jeff with him crossing the
Oh
freeway, which
my!
is just oh my god.
It's like, oh yeah, those are professional stunt drivers.
That's right.
Oh, professional stunt drivers, really? I was wondering how that was.
I wonder how that worked. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like, yeah.
And he comes back. It's like, oh, the stunt drivers were so impressed.
Yeah, and he's just bawling his eyes out. He's like, I want to go home. I just want get errand do errands for people, and that's it.
That's right. Right.
It's like that's all I want to do. It's like, but first we need one more take. But
Yes.
now to I just out of curiosity, because you've made several films. If you're doing a driving scene, if you're doing a scene like that, they're not going. They're not a. You're not gonna have that many. How is that type of scene going to work?
Like the one with him crossing the
Yeah,
freeway.
yeah,
Hmm. Very, 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 very carefully. I mean, you would have to like shut down the highway to have full access to it.
right.
Uh, for him to even cross, you would probably, I guess, adding cars in post production, like add them digitally in post
Right,
production,
right.
which I think they did here, from what I understand. But that's probably how I would do it. But the biggest thing is like getting the budget and the permit to do so is it's pretty tricky.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, obviously, it's like you're not gonna do it in like actual traffic. It's gonna be like you said.
Sure.
They're gonna
Yeah.
shut down the
The
freeway,
highway.
and
Yep.
they're gonna shut that part down. And it's one of those things where it's like I was just kind of curious because of the fact that it's one of those things where you're right. They wouldn't as they would digitally insert cars now, and also it's like, I mean, would they be filmed? How would you do the? I mean, cinematically speaking, would they be going
Yeah.
full
Yeah.
speed or would they be?
You could. I mean, what? Well, I mean, what? That's no. That's actually a very good question. I guess. I guess you could in theory film the cars in the same exact angle as you would the person running across the road, and then splice the two pieces of film together, two
Right,
pieces of footage together,
right.
to sort of give that effect. Or maybe the cars are passing by on a green screen and you put them in that way, or they're completely CGI where they're just completely digital cars,
Yeah.
and but I have a feeling doing the former is a tad bit more practical
Mm.
and somewhat easier, I imagine. or or the alternative, just have them really run across as cars are going by.
Yeah. The thing one of the things that's so great about this movie is that it understands just how absurd action movies are and their
Yes.
logic in this movie. I mean, the story for Chubby Rain, the movie that they're making with Kit Ramsey, is like it's every bit as crazy as just about any sci-fi action movie plot
Yes.
you would find. Like it has these crazy notions of, oh hey, here's how it is, and here's how the story, well, what about this, oh well, we don't think about that, and all that
Yeah.
stuff. And that's one of the things that's just so, as another part of the reason why this movie makes so much sense, because of the fact that this movie really could be made, it could have been made in like the 50s, and it
Yeah.
would
Yep.
have, because I mean, this is essentially like an action movie by way of like 50s sci-fi. Like this
Right.
is very much a 50s sci-fi cheesy.
Oh, without. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this would have been a direct-to-video release. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
and it's just such an insane idea, but um, you also understand it's like it gets the character beats. And I love that Jerry Renfro, when Bobby in the restaurant scene, like Bobby shows him the script and it's like, oh, it starts well, and then he goes to the last scene and
You
it's
go to the
got
last page. Yeah.
gotcha sucker. It's like, oh hey,
That's a catchphrase.
that's a
Yeah.
catchphrase right there. And it's like, and I mean, of course, he's basically lying through his teeth when he says, you know what? Yeah, if you bring Kit Ramsey to this, yeah,
You gotta go.
you
Yeah.
gotta go picture, because I mean he knows he's not gonna get Kit Ramsey to say
Yeah.
yes to this,
Right.
but yeah, it's like just you wonder if that's, I have no doubt that that's how so many scripts get made at times, where it's like, oh yeah, it starts out well, how's it end?
Yeah.
Okay, because you understand the beats that it goes through along the way too. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
like, I don't need to know this story. I basically know how it's
Right.
gonna go. So
No, exactly, and again, that's the great parody of it is Uh, um, because it's still relevant even today, as you said before. I mean,
Yeah.
you could look at this film. Nothing about it is really dated. Interestingly enough, and because it still is somehow very relevant to what happens today in Hollywood.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, excuse me. Uh, I do like that because this movie was produced by Brian Grazer and Imagine
Yeah.
Films. I like that the Chubby Rain title sequence is basically just a
Yes.
parody off of the Imagine logo.
Yep.
Um, and I really this is, and I do have to say, and this is one of the things that makes this film so inspiring is that even in a way even more inspiring than Ed Wood, even though Ed Wood is very much inspired by a true story.
Right.
The way they shoot the climax of the movie
Yep.
and at the observatory
At the observatory. Yep.
and the way that whole sequence progresses, it's just you see the different ways that they planned this out. Like this is
Yeah.
legitimately well
It's,
scouted. This is a well scouted sequence. They've done a
yeah.
really good job figuring out this sequence and how it's going to play out. And it's like it makes you wonder. It's like how on earth did they get permission to do this if
Yeah.
he's not even supposed to know about it?
Right.
It's
Right. Right.
but
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Oh no. Yeah. No. It's great, and I just love how they like that. That how he Steve Martin's character is just like, all right, great, next shot. They run to the next
yeah.
location, go to the next one, the next one. Oh, it's fantastic.
And they use the security cameras at the
Right. Right.
observatory to
Yep.
to fill in some of the blanks and stuff like that.
Yep.
We talked a little bit about the twist with Jiff being Kit's brother,
Yeah.
and that probably has one of my that probably has one of my favorite moments in the entire movie, where it's like you see Jiff taught you see Jiff is not just a comedic character in that moment, but when he's talking about his brother and how his brother isn't really around and stuff like that, and you see the sympathy that like
Yeah.
elicits from the rest of the crew, it's like you see him as an actual human being at that point.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that it's such a great grace note for Martin and Murphy to put that into that character. Well, it's like it's like yeah, this guy looks ridiculous, he talks ridiculous, but
Yeah.
here's a moment to humanize him.
Yeah. And that would have been very easy for Eddie Murphy to play it, just as a cartoon with little dimension, but he somehow gives it just a little bit of depth to not only feel for the guy but to laugh with him.
Yeah. This is I love watching this movie.
Yes.
This is such a pleasure to revisit this one.
Yeah.
It's one I
Yeah.
go back to every couple of years because of the fact, and it is a movie that I do pair with Ed Wood as far as like
Yes.
movies about making movies. And it was funny because last year we talked about Day for Night, the Truffaut movie.
That's right. Yeah.
And so it's like, we what other movies
What
about
other
making
movies
movies
about
could we
movies?
talk
Yeah.
about? I mean, there's The Bad and the Beautiful. There's a bunch of movies that we could talk about, and it's like there's The Player, which would be
That's right.
fantastic.
Yep.
But no, this is the thing about this and the thing about Ed Wood. I think apart from the fact that they're both very very funny movies, is the fact that it's like they also take the idea of making movies, even low budget movies, extremely serious.
Yes.
And it doesn't matter what the story is, it doesn't matter how ridiculous the story is, it takes that story seriously, and the people making these movies are taking these stories seriously. And I
Exactly.
think that's one of the things that is so entertaining. I mean, in a way, they're sort of inside movies for film fans more than anything else. As
Yeah.
general public, I mean, this wasn't a huge success. It did okay, but
Yeah.
wasn't a huge success. And
Right.
so the fact of the matter is, though, it's like it's for people like us who enjoy talking about movies or making movies, it's going to have a little bit more appreciation for us to have a movie like this. And I mean, I think this is, it's like we talked about Frank Oz, and it's like Frank Oz is a filmmaker who genuinely, I think he's a filmmaker, and it's a shame that I don't think he's really made a movie since Death at a Funeral.
Yeah, no, his most recent film was a documentary about him and his fellow performers from the Muppets, called a documentary called Muppet Guys Talking, which is
Oh yeah, that's
fantastic.
right.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. But in terms of narrative work, yeah, Death of the Funeral was the more recent one, and it's a shame. He's a filmmaker that's vastly underrated because he
Yeah.
manages to have a lot of humor and heart in his stories. Like one of my favorite movies growing up was The Indian in the Cupboard. I loved that as a kid,
Mm-hmm.
and I had forgotten that he directed it, but it's very imaginative and inventive and creative. And of course, Little Shop of Horrors is a classic.
Yeah.
So so he's a genius in his own right, and yeah, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
he's always made very fantastic films.
And he had also he co-directed Dark
The Dark
Crystal
Chris,
with
yeah, Jim
Jim
Henson, yeah,
Henson, and then he directed Muppets Take Manhattan, which was his first solo
that's right,
directorial work.
that's right,
Which,
yeah,
I mean, Muppets Take Manhattan is, I mean, I love that era of Muppets, and like
me too. Yep.
that movie has always been a favor of mine.
I like that one too. And what's interesting about that film is that, unlike the two that came before it, of course, Muppet Movie and Great Muppet Caper, those two were very very jokey, funny, had a little bit of heart, particularly Muppet Movie. This one, just I remember being very floored by it as a child because it had humor, but it was predominantly a very kind of a sad story. And I was
Yeah.
like, I remember being a bit taken aback by it as a young kid, but being an adult, I appreciate it more because it did attempt to have a heart and humanity, and taking what's otherwise these characters are just puppets and literally giving them life. I mean, it's a testament to him
Mm-hmm.
as a director, and it's a testament to the performers. Absolutely.
Yeah, and it also it has like it has some of the most emotional moments I think the Muppets have ever had, because of the fact
Sure.
that you have a wedding between Kermit and Miss Piggy,
Uh
and then
huh.
you have the saying goodbye montage,
Yep.
which is just
Oh my
heartbreaking.
god.
Like if if you're watching those characters, and it's like you grew up with the Muppet Show, you grew up with the movies, and it's like you have that sequence. It's like, oh my god, it's like that movie
Yeah.
just that sequence is just kills you.
Yeah, and then
Um,
the scene in which Kermit gets amnesia is traumatizing as a
yeah,
child, and it's like oh my god, but it's wonderful though. It's a wonderful movie, and
hmm
and Frank Oz, he guy's a genius. So
and he's so capable of bringing out humanity. He's so good at being able to bring out emotion through comedy. I mean,
yeah,
you think about the scene in In and Out with Joan Cusack after Kevin Kevin Kline leaves her
yep,
because of the fact that he's gay, and
yeah,
you have her amazing scene in the middle of the road in the wedding dress, and it's
yes.
like it's such a funny image, but oh my god, your heart breaks for her.
Yeah, no, it does. And something else too about Frank Oz is that despite some of the concepts of his work, including Bowfinger being outrageous, goofy, whatever you want to say, he has a very subtle hand in how he directs his actors. They're never over the top. The
Yeah,
actors are the actors are always playing. Steve Martin, for example, in this movie, he plays it straight. Eddie Murphy, you could argue does chew the scenery, but he has to in his role.
yeah,
But I mean, he has a very subtle hand with comedy, even though this because I think that's one of the things he's smart with as a director, is that he knows the situation itself is already funny. The actors don't have to try to be funny to
Mm-hmm.
elevate it. It's already funny. The material is already inherently funny. It's up to so now the actors just have to play it. And as a director, you could see he understands that and knows that, and it's brilliant.
Yeah, and you really see that. I mean, we're kind of going off on a Frank Oz tangent, but you know what? I mean, he doesn't get brought up enough, and the
No.
fact of the matter is, and what you bring up is absolutely on spot, especially when it comes to Death at Funeral, because
Yes.
that's a very broad
That's a
comedic
farce. Yeah.
concept, but it's done in a way like it's a very serious, somber. How are you going to make a comedy set at a funeral? And
Yeah.
the way that unfolds, and you've got this really wonderful script, you've got these actors who play it. You've got broad characters, you've got subtle characters, but
That's
like
right.
you said,
Yeah.
he always directs them in a way that it's always about the character first. It's always about
That's right.
serving the
Yep.
story first. If going over
Yep.
the top is going to serve the story, you do that. Yeah, I mean, Bobby Bowfinger, he's not really much different from a lot of Steve Martin characters.
No.
But
No.
at the same time, because Steve Martin is the way he is as a
Yep.
performer, and so you kind of know what you're going to get from him as in a comedy. But the fact of the matter is, it's like you also see him. He's got a lot of different things in this movie to contend with, because
Yeah.
he's lying to most of his cast and crew. He's trying to get his movie made. He's trying to,
Mm-hmm.
he would like to get somebody, people involved with this movie, to get made, but ultimately it's like he he knows that he's kind of responsible for doing that on his own. And
Yeah.
how is that going to work? And so
Yeah.
he knows the game of with people like Jerry Renfro. He's he talks his way to talking with Kit, trying to get the script in front of him, but that doesn't go well. So how are we going to make this work? Oh well, we'll just film him as
We'll
if
just film without knowing.
yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because one of the things that Frank Oz has said is that you could compare Bowfinger to the group of Muppet characters in that you have Steve Martin, who's the proverbial Kermit,
Yeah.
trying to get this group of crazies to do this crazy thing. Very similar to putting on a show in the Muppet Show, trying to make a movie in the Muppet movie.
Yep.
Or you go back to Muppets Take Manhattan. He's doing all these crazy things to get the show on Broadway, disguising himself and doing all these things. So it's interesting how all that sort of parallels
Yeah.
in that. But I think it's also relevant for any small band of people, a troupe of performers, a group of filmmakers, whatever the case may be. When I first started, I had worked with a bunch of friends doing these kind of quirky comedy sketches for a website. I was helping them out, and the guy who was in charge of it, he had to be like the Steve Martin character in that he had to be sane to try to get these like weird skits to happen. And here we are, this odd group of bunch trying to get this thing to happen. We don't understand the struggles. We have our own things on our mind, and
Mm-hmm.
so when I watch this film, I think about that small band and the purity that comes with that. And I think
Yeah.
as you get big, and I think as you rise to the top and get bigger, that sort of gets lost in the shuffle, which I think is something that this movie reminds you of, is to sort of keep that initial flame that sparked you to do what you love. I
Mm-hmm.
think.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why I asked you. And I mean, it kind of sounds ridiculous, but it's kind
No,
of
no,
true. That's
yeah,
why I asked you. It's like, how inspiring as a filmmaker is this movie to you? Because of the fact that it is ultimately a movie about the love of making movies.
yes,
It's ultimately about a movie, a people who are trying to make a movie. They love the idea of making a movie. They don't have the resources to make that movie what it really could be. So how are we going to just make the movie? And the
yeah,
thing is, it's like the idea of making this type of movie that way, it's like there is something inherently charming to. There's something to be said. The reason Ed Wood's films are objectively terrible,
Sure.
but they're eminently watchable, and it's because
Right.
of the fact that there's this goofy, surreal nature to making movies about those subject matters
Yeah.
on that scale of a budget where you don't really have the budget to do anything.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this is exactly the same way. And it's so but it's so watchable. It's so charming to watch paper plates as flying saucers in Plan 9 from Outer Space. It's
Right.
completely hilarious to watch, you know, actors overacting in this movie in these really goofy, goopy effects,
Yep.
to take place during Chubby Rain. It's one of those
Yep.
things. And then you've got this inevitable, it seems like it seems like Ed Wood and Bowfinger both have kind of insane premieres. I mean,
Yeah.
Chubby Rain technically could probably get that done because of the fact that it was one of the
Because of
biggest
Kit
stars
Ramsey.
of the
Yeah.
world. But if it were anybody other than Kit Ramsey, it wouldn't happen.
No.
So, but the idea that you have this just lovely simple montage of like the people who made Chubby Rain, they have a scene that really shows the care that went into the movie come through, and you see them watching it on the big screen. It's like, oh, that's such a sweet thing, and it's like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's one of those things. It captures the magic of making movies, and it's
Mm-hmm.
like that's one of the things that's so just infinitely watchable about this
Yep.
movie.
Yep. And I love that we see the screenwriter's 8 siblings by his
Yeah,
side. Yeah.
yeah,
That was just that was a nice way that was tied together.
yeah. No, I mean, and ultimately, a lot of these things are brought back, and they play out, up until the climax, which is basically Steve Martin gets an offer to make a movie in this
In
cheap
Taiwan.
kung
Yeah.
fu movie in
Yeah.
Taiwan with Kit Ramsey's brother,
Yeah.
and it's like not even Kit Ramsey with Kit Ramsey's brother.
Ramsey's brother.
And it's like, well, here we go again, and you see a
Yeah.
little bit of it at the end, and it's just hilarious, just how they really have not learned much as far as the
Yeah.
filmmaking process, because
Yeah.
it's like he still has to get Jiff to act. It's like,
Yep.
no, keep going, keep going.
Yeah.
It's like when you can see the camera in the mirror, and
Oh yeah. Yep. Yep.
but
Yeah.
no, this is there's a reason this has always been one of my favorite movies from this year. It's because of the affection that it has for the subject matter and the characters and all of that stuff. It's just also a lot of fun to watch.
It is, yeah, and in a year like 1999 that was kind of dry on comedies, like this was a fresh gem that came out during that period.
Well, and the funny thing is, it's like I've talked about American Pie on this movie
Yeah,
already on this podcast. We brought up Austin Powers' Spy Who Shagged Me,
yeah,
which was the big comedic juggernaut that year. And it's like I'm not necessarily going to go over it because there's not really a whole lot to go over, and I'm
sure,
not really a huge fan of that franchise. But you had a bunch of teen comedies earlier this year.
yeah,
That was whole playing out. You had She's All That. You had Varsity
sure.
Blues. Election is a brilliant comedy.
Oh, it's brilliant. Yeah,
And then, but yeah, it's weird because of the fact that you mentioned that it's kind of light on comedy. It is to a certain extent. It was also kind of light on action movies too.
it
That's
was.
what
Yeah,
makes this really funny. But but and that's what makes 1999 such an interesting year because of the fact that it's comedies and action are basically like the biggest successful genres in Hollywood, or they kind
yeah,
of were at the time. but
Yeah.
there really wasn't a whole lot of evidence to that in this year. Like
No, not
there,
really.
like Julia Roberts had a couple big hits with like Notting Hill, Runaway Bride, and
Yeah.
stuff like that, but nobody really remembers those. Although Notting
Yeah.
Hill was actually pretty good.
Yeah.
Um, but the thing is, it's like there wasn't. It was always the smaller stuff. It was the independent films. It was the films that
Yep.
took chances.
Yep.
And it's like Bowfinger is not necessarily a movie that takes chances. I don't
No.
think, because it basically is. It's a movie star vehicle for Steve Martin and Eddie
Yeah.
Murphy, and
Yeah.
it's Eddie Murphy at sort of not necessarily the peak of his powers, because I mean you could argue that was with like the first Beverly Hills Cop and Trading Places
Sure.
and 48 Hours and stuff like that. But at least his second, when he got his second wind with The Nutty Professor,
Yeah.
and then he had Shrek a couple of years later, which
Hmm.
blew him up even as well.
Yep.
So I mean, this was sort of A. Murphy with his second wind here, and Steve Martin was still relatively successful. You know, people still liked Steve Martin. Um, I mean, but he wasn't quite the movie star that he was before.
Yeah.
So this is kind of, this was kind of like the big, in a way it was sort of like the a big sort of turning point for them in their careers, as far as like what we saw them in moving forward, but was also something where it's like it's also star vehicle. It's a star vehicle
Right.
comedy. So,
Right.
and
Yeah.
that's one of the things that makes this, it is very much it's something that's that was very conventional in Hollywood at the time, but and you don't really see a whole lot of it now.
Right. And going back to what you said earlier, when you were listing some of the comedies that come out that year, yeah, a lot of them were the teen comedies. You weren't really seeing comedies such as this, where it was more about character, and genuinely humorous. Like it didn't have to try hard to be
Yeah.
funny, like how some of the other ones maybe had to do. Yeah, by today's standards, like I guess you could almost say this is kind of an old fashioned comedy and how it
Oh
plays out, which
yeah.
is yeah, that's not a bad thing at all. No,
No,
that's a great
not at
thing.
all. And it's a movie I always enjoy watching. It's a movie that I always appreciate for a lot of different ways, but more often than not, it's a movie that I appreciate because of the fact that it knows the struggle of making movies, and it's something that it's also a movie that really appreciates that struggle and doesn't make that's the thing that really makes this movie work ultimately, is that it doesn't make fun of these people
No,
in their struggles to make this movie. It respects them, and it appreciates that struggle.
yeah,
And I think
yeah.
that's one of the things that makes this such an entertaining comedy.
Oh, without a doubt, yeah. There's no false pretenses about it. It knows that its characters are flawed, and even points to them, and in some cases, not makes fun of them, but it brings light to some of their flaws. Such as the Heather Graham character, the Steve Martin character, and that's what makes it so endearing and funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, do you have anything more that you want to add?
No, I don't think so. No.
Okay. Well, Chris, thank you very much for joining me today to discuss
Likewise.
Bowfinger.
Yeah, thank you as well.
Yeah, and I know we've got one more. We've got Bicentennial Man, which I need to
That's right.
get hold of to rewatch that, and I'm really curious to rewatch that because it's been
Yeah.
about 20 years since I've seen it, and I'm definitely curious to see how I feel about it now.
Yeah, yeah. It's been a few years since I've seen it as well. I remember seeing that one in the cinema. I have a bit of a nostalgia for it, but also I've always enjoyed it. But it's been a while since I've seen it.
But
Yeah.
yeah, thank you very much for joining me.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Chris Esper for joining me today to discuss Bowfinger. It's a movie that really I think speaks to a lot of people who enjoy films, enjoy watching films, enjoy learning how they get made to see just how difficult it is, the process is. And I hope you enjoyed the discussion on it. And if you haven't had a chance to see it, I highly recommend it, as well as the other wonderful Frank Oz films we talked about. He's a filmmaker that, from a comedic standpoint, does not get talked about a lot. And I think that's a shame. He's best known for Yoda and for his work with the Muppets, but he's so much more than that when you look at his films. Coming up on the class of 1999 for the Sonic Cinema podcast, we get into some gritty drama. We're going to get into horror with October, including two of the biggest hits of the year, as well as another horror movie that is definitely worth considering. And then it's gonna be Fast and Furious. There are a lot of movies I still want to get to for the class of 1999. Check me out on patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. You'll see a lot of early access reviews to those films, and there are a few that I still haven't posted on the main page just yet because I haven't gone through the podcast form, and hope to at some point. But for now, this is Brian Scuttle. Check me out on Sonic Cinema Podcast YouTube channel or